You're sitting in your room. Nothing is playing. No notifications. No one talking. Just quiet. And within about 10 seconds, your hand is already reaching for your phone. Not because anything is wrong. Not because you needed to check something urgent. Just because the silence started to feel like too much. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. And you're definitely not just addicted to your phone. Even though that's the explanation most people reach for. There's something deeper going on. Something that has very little to do with willpower. And a lot to do with how your mind learned a long time ago. What silence actually means. Maybe you've noticed it during a quiet commute, in the seconds before falling asleep. Or in the gap, right after finishing a task, when there's nothing lined up next. That small window where nothing is demanding your attention. And somehow, it feels harder to sit in than the busy parts of your day ever did. Today, we're going to unpack exactly why quiet moments feel uncomfortable for so many people, even when nothing is wrong. And by the end, you might understand your own restlessness in a completely different way. Let's get into it. Silence isn't the problem. What silence represents is, here's the first thing to understand. For most people who struggle with quiet moments, it was never really about the silence itself. Sound and stimulation aren't inherently more comfortable than stillness. If they were, meditation, deep sleep, and quiet mornings wouldn't feel good to anyone. The discomfort isn't coming from the silence. It's coming from what your mind has learned silence tends to be followed by, or what silence forces you to notice. Think of it this way. Silence is like an empty room. The room itself isn't good or bad. What matters is what's usually waiting in that room for you. For some people, that room is peaceful. For others, that room is where every unresolved thought, feeling, and worry finally gets a chance to speak, because there's nothing left to drown them out. If your mind has learned that this room tends to be uncomfortable, of course you avoid walking into it. That's not weakness. That's a very logical response to a pattern your brain has noticed. So the real question isn't why do I hate silence? The real question is, what has silence come to represent for me? And that answer is usually built from a few very specific sources. Reason 1. Silence removes the distraction. And the distraction was doing a job. Most of us fill quiet moments with something. Scrolling, music, a show playing in the background, a conversation, anything. And most of the time, we assume we're doing this because we're bored. But for a lot of people, that constant stimulation isn't filling boredom. It's doing a specific job, keeping certain thoughts or feelings from surfacing. As long as there's noise, there's no space for the thought you've been avoiding to actually form. The moment the noise stops, that thought finally has room to appear. And often, it's not one big dramatic thought. It's something smaller and quieter, like a low hum of unease. A vague sense that something isn't quite settled. A feeling you haven't had time to name. This is why silence can feel almost louder than noise. It's not actually louder. It's just that, for the first time in hours, there's nothing competing with what's underneath. Once you notice this pattern, something interesting happens. You stop seeing your constant need for background noise as a bad habit and start seeing it as information. It's telling you there's something you've been quietly avoiding. Not to fix immediately, not to panic about, just to notice. Think about the last time you had a genuinely quiet drive. No podcast, no music, nothing but the road. If a thought popped up almost immediately, something you'd been putting off thinking about, that wasn't a coincidence. That's usually the exact moment noise would have kept it buried. The silence didn't create the thought. It just finally gave it room to speak. Reason 2. For some people, silence used to mean danger, not peace. This one goes a little deeper, and it explains why silence can feel unsafe rather than simply boring. If you grew up, or spent a significant period of your life in an environment where things could shift quickly, where calm moments were sometimes followed by tension, conflict, or unpredictability, your nervous system may have quietly learned an important lesson. Quiet doesn't necessarily mean safe. Quiet sometimes means the calm before something changes. In an environment like that, staying alert wasn't overthinking. It was useful. Noticing small shifts in mood, sound, or atmosphere helped you prepare. Over time, your brain got very good at treating stillness as a signal to stay watchful, rather than a signal to relax. The tricky part is that this wiring doesn't automatically update once your circumstances change. Even years later, even in a completely calm and safe environment, a part of your nervous system may still respond to quiet moments the way it always did, with low-grade alertness instead of ease. This is why some people describe silence as feeling tense rather than peaceful, even when they can't explain why. It's not that anything is actually wrong right now. It's that stillness itself has, for them, historically been associated with something other than safety. Understanding this doesn't fix it instantly, but it does something important. It replaces self-judgment with self-understanding. You're not broken for feeling uneasy in quiet moments. Your nervous system is simply running an old pattern that once made sense. Some people notice this most clearly late at night, when the house finally goes quiet and everyone else is asleep. That specific silence, the kind with nothing left to distract from it, can feel heavier than any other. It's not that anything is different about that particular quiet. It's that it's the least filtered version of stillness most people encounter in a day. And old wiring tends to surface most clearly when there's nothing left competing for its attention. Reason. 3. Constant stimulation has quietly reset your baseline there. There's also a more modern piece to this puzzle, one that applies to almost everyone. Regardless of background, most of us live inside a nearly constant stream of input. Notifications, short videos, quick conversations, background sound. Our attention rarely gets long, uninterrupted stretches of nothing. And over time, this constant stimulation resets what feels normal. When stimulation is your baseline, its absence doesn't feel neutral. It feels like something is missing. Your brain isn't used to processing nothing happening as a normal state, so it interprets the gap as discomfort, even boredom that borders on distress. This is sometimes described as a shrinking tolerance for stillness. The less practice your mind gets sitting in quiet, unstimulated moments, the more foreign and uncomfortable those moments start to feel, almost like a muscle that's stopped being used. The good news here is that unlike some of the deeper patterns we've talked about, this one responds fairly quickly to practice. Tolerance for stillness isn't fixed. It's trainable, the same way attention span or physical stamina is trainable. It just takes a small, repeated willingness to sit in the gap instead of immediately filling it. Reason 4. Silence forces you to be with yourself. Without a role to play, this last reason is subtle, but it might be the most important one. Throughout the day, most of us are playing some kind of role. Employee, friend, sibling, student, whatever the moment calls for. Each of those roles gives you something to respond to, something to focus on outside yourself. Silence takes all of that away. There's no role to play, no one to respond to, nothing external asking anything of you. What's left is simply you, with your own thoughts, in a space with no distractions and no direction. For people who are used to defining themselves through what they do or how they perform for others, this can feel surprisingly disorienting. Not because there's anything wrong with them, but because they haven't had much practice simply existing without a task attached to it. This is part of why some people feel a strange restlessness on a day off, or during a quiet weekend with nothing planned. It's not that rest itself is unpleasant. It's that rest removes the roles and tasks that usually give shape to their sense of self. And what's left underneath that structure can feel unfamiliar. It's worth asking yourself honestly, if nothing needed you right now, no message to answer, no task to finish, no one to help, would you know what to do with that moment? For a lot of people, the honest answer is a brief flicker of unease before they reach for something to fill it. That flicker isn't a flaw. It's just a sign of how little practice most of us get simply being, rather than doing. What this actually costs. It's worth pausing here to be honest about what constantly avoiding silence quietly costs. When every quiet moment gets filled immediately, you lose something important. The chance to actually process what's happening in your life. Emotions, decisions, and half-formed thoughts need some unstructured time to settle. Without that time, they don't disappear. They just stay a little unresolved, quietly adding up in the background. Constant stimulation also affects the quality of rest itself. A body and mind that never fully downshift into stillness stay in a low-grade state of activation, even during moments that are supposed to be restful. This is part of why some people can spend an entire weekend relaxing and still feel just as tired as before it started. And there's a quieter cost too. Some of the best ideas, insights, and moments of clarity tend to show up in exactly the kind of unstructured, quiet space that constant stimulation doesn't allow. If every gap gets filled instantly, you may be missing some of your own best thinking, simply because you never gave it room to arrive. How to actually get comfortable with quiet. Here is where we shift from understanding the problem to gently working with it. Not by forcing yourself into long, uncomfortable silence all at once, but by building tolerance the same way you'd build any new skill. Gradually, start absurdly small. Instead of trying to sit in silence for 20 minutes, start with 60 seconds. Just one uninterrupted minute with no phone, no music, nothing. It will likely feel strange at first. That's normal. You're not trying to enjoy it immediately. You're just trying to prove to your nervous system that nothing bad happens in that minute. Notice what comes up, without rushing to fix it. When a thought or feeling surfaces in the quiet, you don't need to solve it on the spot. Just notice it. Oh, there's that thought about the email. Oh, there's that low hum of worry. Naming it, even briefly, is often enough to take away some of its intensity. Separate silence from productivity. You don't need to journal, meditate, or plan anything during quiet time for it to count. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do with a quiet moment is simply let it be quiet. Without turning it into another task to complete, build it into transitions, not just big blocks of time. You don't need a silent retreat to practice this. A quiet car ride without the radio. A walk without headphones. A few minutes before checking your phone in the morning. These small repeated moments do more for your tolerance of stillness than one long, forced session ever could. Remind yourself what the discomfort actually is. When the urge to fill the silence hits, it can help to remember this isn't danger. It's just an old signal or an untrained muscle doing what it's used to doing. You don't have to obey it immediately. You can simply notice the pull and choose to stay a little longer anyway. Here's what that might look like in practice. You sit down after a long day with no plan to check your phone. Within seconds, the familiar pull shows up. That itch to pick it up, scroll, fill the space. Instead of obeying it automatically, you pause and name it. This is just the urge to fill the quiet. I don't have to act on it right away. You let 10 more seconds pass, then 30. Nothing bad happens. The itch fades slightly, the way any urge does when it isn't immediately fed. That's the entire practice. Not eliminating the urge, just proving, one small moment at a time, that you can sit with it a little longer than before. The real goal. Here's what I want you to take from all of this. The goal was never to force yourself to love silence, or to sit in stillness for hours, pretending it feels peaceful when it doesn't yet. The goal is simply to stop being afraid of it, to let quiet moments exist without immediately needing to escape them. Because somewhere underneath all that noise you've been using to fill the gaps, there's a version of you that can actually rest. Not perform, not distract, not manage anyone else's mood, or stay one step ahead of anything. Just exist quietly and be okay. That version of you isn't gone. It's just been waiting for a little more practice and a little more proof that silence isn't something to be afraid of. Give it a real chance the next time it shows up. Not by forcing it to feel good right away, but by simply not running from it the moment it appears. Over time, that small shift in how you meet the quiet can change how the rest of your life feels too. A little less noisy, a little more your own. If this gave you a new way to understand your own restlessness, that's exactly the kind of thing this channel is here for. Subscribe, because we're going to keep breaking down the quiet patterns that shape your everyday life. One honest video at a time. I'll see you in the next one.